For David Chen, the move to Maple Creek Estates was a conscious unplugging from a life dictated by frequencies and waveforms. He traded the high-stress world of audio engineering for the quiet hum of the suburbs, seeking a sanctuary for his family. But in this idyllic haven, a new sound begins to emerge, one that slips past the hearing of adults, a high-frequency signal whispering only to the young and the innocent. It emanates from the sleek new cell tower overlooking their perfect homes, a silent shepherd guiding his 6-year-old daughter and the neighborhood's animals toward a terrifying, unseen purpose. Let's begin the story. Get comfortable and listen closely. The air in Maple Creek Estates smelled of money, or more precisely, what money bought. Freshly laid sod, curing paint, and the faint, clean scent of PVC from newly installed window frames. David Chen breathed it in, a manufactured piece he'd paid a premium for. This was the antithesis of his old life, the one spent in soundproofed studios in downtown Los Angeles, chasing sonic perfection for bands whose egos were as loud as their amplifiers. Now his loudest noise was the cheerful babble of his 6-year-old, Lily, as she chased a butterfly across their immaculate lawn. His wife, Sarah, a high school biology teacher, watched from the porch, her smile the final seal of approval on their new life. This was it, the suburban dream, fully rendered. His remote IT support job was blessedly monotonous, a gentle current compared to the rapids of his former career. Still, old habits died hard. David's ears, trained to isolate a single flawed frequency in a symphony of sound, were never truly off. He noticed the rhythmic chirp of a specific cricket, the low-frequency rumble of the distant highway, the way the wind whistled through the eaves of their identical beige house. And he noticed the tower. It stood on the low hill that bordered the development, a stark, gray needle against the blue canvas of the sky. It wasn't the clunky latticework design of older cell towers. This one was sleek, modern, a single smooth column with a subtle, finned head. It was more monolith than utility pole, a piece of alien architecture dropped into the bucolic landscape. A sign of progress, he told himself. Better reception for his work calls. The first sign of trouble wasn't a sound, but a silence. Buster, their golden retriever, a dog whose tail was a perpetual motion machine, began to act strangely. It started with a refusal to go into the backyard. He would stand at the glass sliding door, whining, the fur on his neck ridged. Then came the scratching. In the dead of night, David would be woken by a frantic, rhythmic thump-scratch from the living room. He'd find Buster at the wall, the one that faced the hill with the tower, digging at the drywall as if trying to burrow away from something. A week later, it was Lily. "Daddy," she said midway through building a Lego castle on the living room rug, "the bee is back." David glanced around. "I don't see a bee, sweetie." "I don't see it. I hear it," she insisted, her small hands flying up to cover her ears. "It's buzzy. Make it stop." He and Sarah exchanged a look. They checked her ears for wax, looked for signs of a fever. Nothing. "Maybe it's just your ears popping," Sarah suggested, her voice calm and reassuring, like on an airplane. Lily seemed to accept this, but the complaints continued. The buzzing bee would appear at random times, during dinner, in the car, while she was playing in her room. Each time, her reaction was the same. A wince, hands clamped over her ears, a look of deep annoyance on her face. They dismissed it all as the friction of settling in. Buster was territorial, getting used to new smells and sounds. Lily had an overactive imagination, perhaps fueled by the anxiety of a new school and new friends. These weren't signs of a creeping horror. They were footnotes in the manual of a young family putting down roots. David would watch Buster stare at the wall, or see Lily flinch at an invisible sound and feel a flicker of unease. But then he'd look at his perfect house, his green lawn, and the silent, watchful tower on the hill, and tell himself it was nothing. It was just the sound of a new, normal life. And for a little while, he almost believed it. The buzzing bee phase was supposed to pass. Instead, it evolved. Lily stopped complaining about the sound and started listening to it. The shift was subtle at first, then deeply unsettling. David would find her standing in the middle of a room, her toys forgotten, her head tilted at a precise angle toward the large picture window in the living room, the one with a perfect, uninterrupted view of the tower on the hill. Her expression was the most disturbing part. It was a complete blank. Not bored, not tired, but a placid, vacant stillness, her brown eyes unfocused, as if she were looking at something a million miles away. These episodes would last for a minute or two. When she snapped out of it, she was different. Sometimes she was withdrawn, refusing to speak, retreating into a silent world of her own. Other times, she would engage in strange, repetitive behaviors. She'd spend an hour meticulously lining up her crayons in a specific, unchanging color pattern. Or she would walk the perimeter of the backyard, taking slow, deliberate steps, her path as rigid as a soldier's on patrol. "It's a phase," Sarah insisted one evening, her arms crossed as they watched Lily from the kitchen. Their daughter was in the yard, picking up pebbles and arranging them in a small, tight spiral near the fence. Kids do weird, ritualistic things. It's how they learn to control their world. But David's trained senses told him this wasn't an internal process. It was a response. The entire neighborhood felt off-key, like an instrument slowly being tuned to the wrong note. He started noticing the animals. Next door, the miller's two beagles, normally a cacophony of yaps, would start howling in unison at exactly 3:15 p.m. every day. It wasn't a playful bark. It was a mournful, eerie sound that raised the hairs on David's arms. He noticed the sky above Maple Creek Estates was often empty. Birds seemed to arc around the development, their flight paths conspicuously avoiding the airspace directly over the houses. The local cats, once bold hunters, were now phantoms, seen only as fleeting shadows under decks and behind bushes, their bodies low to the ground, skittish and fearful. And everything, David realized with a cold knot in his stomach, was oriented toward the tower. The dogs howled facing it. The birds' flight paths curved away from it. Buster still scratched at the wall that faced it. And Lily listened to it. His audio engineering instincts, long dormant, roared back to life. He knew about ultrasonic and high-frequency sounds. He knew that the range of human hearing, especially for adults, was pathetic. A child's ear, a dog's ear. They were sophisticated instruments, capable of perceiving entire worlds of sound he was deaf to. One evening, he sat on the floor next to Lily. "Sweetie, can you tell me about the sound, the bee sound?" Lily didn't look at him. She was staring at the darkening window, her head cocked slightly. "It's not a bee," she whispered, her voice distant. "A bee stings. This is the fizzy sound, like soda in your ear." She paused. "It sings. It sings picture songs." "Picture songs? What do they look like?" She finally turned to him, but her eyes were still glassy, like twisty lines and long straight lines. "It tells stories." "What kind of stories?" David pressed, his heart starting to beat faster. Lily just shook her head. a flicker of frustration crossing her face as if she couldn't find the words. It doesn't use talking, it just puts the story in your head. She stood up, her listening session apparently over. She walked to the fireplace and began methodically stacking the decorative stones from the hearth into the same tight spiral she'd made outside. Her movements were fluid, practiced, as if she were following a set of instructions only she could hear. David watched her, the casual reassurances he'd been telling himself crumbling into dust. This wasn't an ear infection. This wasn't imagination. Something was broadcasting a story directly into her daughter's mind, and he couldn't hear a single word. Panic is a frequency of its own. For David, it was a low, rising hum that started in his gut and resonated behind his eyes. He couldn't sit still, couldn't accept it's a phase any longer. In the dead of night, he went to the garage, the tomb of his former life, and began to excavate. Buried under camping gear and boxes of holiday decorations were his old Pelican cases, scarred with airline tags and gaffer tape. He clicked open the latches, the scent of old electronics and soldered metal filling the air. He pulled out a Schoop's Colette microphone, its capsule designed to capture frequencies up to 40 kilohertz, far beyond the range of human hearing. He found his portable recorder and, most importantly, his old laptop, still loaded with the professional spectrum analysis software that had once been his world. He set up the microphone in Lily's room while she slept, aiming it out her window directly at the tower on the hill. He ran a long cable down to the living room, plugged it into his interface, and hit record. For hours, he watched the screen, seeing nothing but the gentle, ambient noise of a suburban night. The bass line was flat, quiet. He felt a pang of foolishness. Maybe Sarah was right. Maybe he was chasing ghosts. Then, at 3:13 a.m., it appeared. It wasn't a sound, it was a ghost on the machine. A razor-thin and possibly straight line materialized on the spectrum analyzer, glowing green at a steady 37.5 kilohertz. It was clean, pure, and utterly artificial. As he watched, mesmerized, the signal began to pulse. It wasn't random, it was a rhythm, a complex cadence of on-off patterns interspersed with smaller, ghost-like harmonics that flickered around the primary frequency. This wasn't interference from a radio station or bleed from a power line. This had structure. It was data. It was a broadcast. The next morning, his hands shaking slightly, he showed Sarah. He pulled her to the laptop, his voice tight with a mixture of terror and vindication. "Look," he said, pointing to the saved recording, "right here, 37.5 kilohertz. It's real. I'm not imagining it. This is what she's hearing." Sarah leaned in, her expression laced with concern. She saw a graph, a line spiking on a computer screen. "David, what does that even mean?" "It could be anything. A new security system in the neighborhood, a garage door opener, an atmospheric fluke." "No," he said more forcefully than he intended. "Look at the pattern. It's not noise, it's a signal. It's complex. It's being broadcast deliberately." "From the tower?" she asked, skepticism creeping back into her voice. "Honey, it's a cell tower. They're everywhere. You're letting your old job get to you. You're looking for problems where there are just technical specs you don't like." Her words were meant to be calming, but to David they felt like a denial of a clear and present danger. She was seeing a father's anxiety. He was seeing an enemy transmission. Frustrated and feeling utterly alone, David got in his car and drove. He followed the winding road up the hill, parking as close as he could to the chain-link fence that surrounded the tower's base. The structure loomed over him, silent and imposing. There were no company logos, no Verizon, no AT&T, only generic placards with high-voltage warnings and a meaningless string of serial numbers. He got out of the car and walked to the fence. The air felt thick, heavy with a static charge. And then he felt it. It wasn't a sound he heard with his ears, but a vibration he felt in his molars, a deep subliminal hum that seemed to resonate directly with his skull. It was the carrier wave, the silent, physical presence of the signal. He gripped the fence, the metal cold and humming against his palms, and stared up at the source. This wasn't a cell tower. It was a tuning fork, and it was ringing at a pitch designed to reshape the world, starting with his own daughter. David started watching. He became a ghost in his own neighborhood, his remote job a perfect cover for his new obsession. He'd sit at his desk, his office window providing a clear view of the street and the park at the end of the cul-de-sac. He wasn't looking for friends or waving at neighbors anymore. He was looking for the listeners. And he found them. He saw it in the boy 2 houses down, a 7-year-old named Leo. Leo would be riding his scooter, then suddenly brake, standing one-footed and perfectly balanced, his head cocked toward the hill. A minute later, he'd resume his ride as if nothing had happened. He saw it in a pair of preschool-aged twin girls who would stop their game of tag, turn to face each other, and hum a single, monotonous, unmusical note in perfect, eerie unison for 30 seconds before breaking apart and laughing, the moment forgotten. The games were the worst part. He saw 3 young children, including Lily, gathered in the park. They weren't playing on the swings or the slide. They were on the ground, silently collecting acorns and small stones and arranging them into complex, spiraling patterns on the pavement. Their movements were synchronized, their focus absolute. It wasn't play, it was ritual. It was a construction project guided by an invisible architect. His growing horror was isolating him, turning him into the neighborhood eccentric muttering about frequencies. He needed an ally. He needed proof that he wasn't going insane. He found his chance with Mark, Leo's father. Mark was a friendly, easygoing guy, an accountant who grilled the mean burger at the last neighborhood block party. David caught him as he was loading groceries into his car, his son Leo standing blankly by the curb, listening. "Mark," David began, his approach cautious. "Can I ask you something weird?" Mark forced a smile, but his eyes were tired. "Depends on the level of weird, man." "Your son, Leo, have you noticed him stopping to listen to things? Things you can't hear?" Mark's friendly demeanor evaporated. His face hardened. "He's just spacing out. Kids do that." He was defensive, his tone sharp. It was the same wall David had built for himself, the same one Sarah still lived behind. David took a gamble. He pulled out his phone, showing Mark a picture he'd taken of the spectrum analyzer's glowing green line. "My daughter does it too," David said, his voice low and urgent. "I'm an audio engineer. I found this. A high-frequency signal broadcast all day, every day. Lily calls it the fizzy sound. What does Leo call it?" Mark stared at the phone, then at David, his defenses crumbling. The relief on his face was terrifying. The whispering wind," he stammered, his voice cracking. "He says it tells him what to draw. He's been having nightmares, wakes up screaming about too many whispers." He ran a hand through his hair, his fear palpable. "God, I thought he had a tumor. We have a neurology appointment next month." He looked at David, a desperate man finding a lifeline. "You're telling me this is real?" That evening, the proof became undeniable. Lily had taken to drawing, her colorful box of crayons spread across the dining room table. For weeks, her art had been the usual childhood fare: lopsided houses with smoke curling from the chimney, stick-figure families holding hands under a smiling sun. But now her drawings had changed. She filled page after page with the same images. There were no people, no animals, no houses, just shapes. She drew complex, interlocking geometric patterns and, most disturbingly, dozens and dozens of spirals. Tight, perfect spirals all radiating outward from a single, tall black tower that dominated the center of every page. David picked one up, his hand trembling slightly. "Honey, what are these pictures of?" Lily didn't look up from her work. She was carefully drawing another spiral, her tongue sticking out in concentration. "They're the listen pictures," she said simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "The bee song wants them." The recording on David's laptop was a silent, pulsing line of data, a threat he could see but not hear. That had to change. He needed to know what the signal was saying, what stories it was putting in his daughter's head. He spent an entire night locked in his makeshift studio, headphones clamped on, diving back into the arcane world of digital audio manipulation. He isolated the clean, sharp 37.5 kilohertz frequency, filtering out all the ambient noise around it. Then, using a process called pitch shifting, he began to lower it, octave by octave, pulling the alien frequency down into the muddy, familiar waters of human hearing. The first audible sound was a high-pitched, piercing whine, like a mosquito screaming directly into his brain. He kept going, lowering it further. The whine deepened into a discordant hum, then a thrumming rhythmic pulse. And then he heard it. The sound that filled his headphones was one of pure, primal horror. It wasn't a simple tone. It was a layered, impossibly complex soundscape. At its base was a deep, guttural pulse, like a monstrous, slow-beating heart. Over that, a chaotic layer of sharp digital clicks and static chittered like a nest of robotic insects. But the worst part, the part that made him rip the headphones off his ears, was the voice. Woven into the sonic tapestry was something that sounded chillingly like distorted, sibilant whispers. It wasn't a human language, but it had the cadence of one, a rhythmic, hypnotic chant that seemed to bypass his ears and slither directly into his thoughts. It was incomprehensible, but its intent was not. It was persuasive. It was commanding. Listening to it for even a few seconds gave him a splitting headache and a profound sense of vertigo, as if the very architecture of his mind was being warped. He pushed back from the desk, his heart hammering against his ribs. This wasn't a signal. It was an incantation. He forced himself to listen again, this time in short bursts, trying to analyze it. Within the rhythmic whispers, he could discern repeating patterns, phonetic phrases that occurred over and over. It wasn't just a message. It felt like code, like instructions for a machine made of flesh and bone. His digital tampering had an immediate, terrifying effect. That night, a scream tore through the house. He and Sarah bolted into Lily's room to find her sitting bolt upright in bed, her eyes wide with terror, tears streaming down her face. "They're too loud," she shrieked, clawing at her ears. "The bees are so loud. They're angry." It took them an hour to calm her down. David knew with sickening certainty that he had caused this. By capturing and manipulating the signal, he hadn't just observed it, he'd somehow interacted with it. He had touched the web, and the spider now knew he was there. The next day brought a new level of dread. Sarah called him from work, her voice frantic. "I got a call from Brenda Miller next door. You need to come home, now." He ran out into his backyard and froze. There, at the far end of the lawn, stood a small, silent assembly. It was Lily and Leo and the twin girls from down the street. All four of them were standing perfectly still, shoulder to shoulder, in a small, straight line. Their heads were tilted up, and they were all staring, blank-faced and unresponsive, at the tower on the hill. David called out Lily's name. He shouted it. She didn't move. She didn't blink. She and the other children were utterly transfixed by the amplified, angry song that only they could hear. They were no longer just listening. They were reporting for duty. The sight of their children standing like silent, obedient statues had shattered Mark's skepticism and galvanized them both into action. This was no longer a mystery to be solved. It was a fire to be put out. While Sarah, now terrified into belief, stayed with the children, David and Mark turned their fear into a desperate, frantic investigation. They became nocturnal researchers, fueled by coffee and dread. Their first stop was the County Planning Office website, a labyrinth of digital records and permits. They searched for the plot of land the tower was on. The permit was new, issued just 8 months ago. The applicant wasn't a telecom giant, but a holding company with a bland corporate name, Ethelred Communications. A quick search revealed Ethelred was a shell corporation registered to a P.O. box in Delaware with no public-facing presence, no website, and no listed officers. It was a digital ghost. They dug deeper, pulling old property records. Before the developer bought the land from Maple Creek Estates, the entire area, including the hill, had belonged to a single entity for over 50 years, a reclusive private research firm called the Stiora Institute. Their stated purpose was geological and psychoacoustic research. Psychoacoustics, David muttered, the word tasting like poison. The study of the psychological and physiological effects of sound on humans. Mark was scrolling through archived local news articles from the 70s and 80s. "Get this," he said, his voice low. The Stiora Institute was controversial. People complained about it for years. Headaches, insomnia, pets acting strangely. The founder, a Dr. Alastair Finch, was some kind of eccentric genius, believed certain natural geological formations generated unique low-frequency infrasound and radio frequencies. He called it resonant geography. A theory began to form in David's mind, jagged and terrifying. He found a place with a natural frequency, David pieced together, thinking out loud, a genius loci, a spirit of a place, but a scientific one. He built a lab to study it, maybe to amplify it. And then the institute shut down, maybe Finch died, and the place sat dormant for decades, until Ethelred Communications shows up, buys the most active spot, the hill, and builds this. He gestured vaguely toward the window. It's not a telecom tower, it's an amplifier, a modern, high-tech version of whatever Finch was building. They were living on the grounds of a failed experiment that someone had decided to switch back on. But why? Was it a weapon? A form of mass behavioral influence? Or was it something more esoteric, more horrifying? The word Dr. Finch used, resonant geography, stuck with David. Maybe they weren't broadcasting something at the hill. Maybe they were just giving a voice to something that was already there, something ancient and patient that had been humming in the rock for millennia. The language in the signal wasn't a human invention, it was the native tongue of the place itself. And the tower was a translator, converting a geologic whisper into a psychoacoustic command, slowly and methodically retuning the developing neural pathways of their children, overriding their personalities with its own alien consciousness. David looked at Mark, the fluorescent glow of the laptop screen reflecting in his tired eyes. "The police will laugh at us," David said. "We'll sound like conspiracy nuts. My kid is being brainwashed by a singing hill." Mark nodded, his jaw set. "No authorities. No one's coming to help us." He looked from David to the dark window, behind which the tower stood like a silent sentinel. "So we have to stop it. We have to go up there and unplug the damn thing ourselves." The plan was desperate, forged from a blend of David's technical knowledge and Mark's grim determination. Their target was a gray utility box at the base of the tower, which David's research suggested housed the primary signal transmitter and power control. The goal wasn't destruction, but disruption. cut the broadcast, silence the song. They moved under the cover of a moonless night, dressed in dark clothing, a shared backpack full of tools, bolt cutters, insulated screwdrivers, a multimeter slung over David's shoulder. As they left the manicured streets of Maple Creek and started up the rough service road to the hill, the air changed. The subliminal hum David had felt in his teeth was now a palpable pressure against his eardrums, a low-frequency thrum that made the world feel unstable. "You feel that?" Mark whispered, his voice tight. "It's the low end of the carrier wave," David breathed, fighting a wave of dizziness. "It's affecting us too. Just slower." They were walking into the heart of the beast, and it was defending itself not with alarms or guards, but with its own psychoacoustic field. Strange phantom sounds flickered at the edge of their hearing, a whisper of their name on the wind, the distant cry of a baby. As they cleared a line of trees and the tower came into full view, a new horror unfolded. Below them, trickling out from the backyards of their silent homes, were small figures. 1, then 3, then 7. Children, walking slowly with the placid, zombie-like gait David knew all too well. It was Lily and Leo and the others. The signal had grown stronger, more insistent, a silent Pied Piper calling its flock. They were being drawn to the tower, a living shield of innocence. "Oh God," Mark choked out, grabbing David's arm. "What do we do?" "You have to stop them," David said, his mind racing. "Don't scare them. Just head them off. Keep them back. I need 5 minutes." It was a race against 2 clocks. David sprinted the last 50 yards, the thrumming in his head intensifying with every step. He snapped the cheap lock on the chain-link fence with the bolt cutters and threw open the gate. The utility box was right where he expected. As he worked the specialized screws on the panel, his vision swam. The rhythmic whispering from his headphones was now a faint, maddening murmur in the air around him. He could almost understand it. It was promising things: peace, order, unity. He wrenched the panel open. Inside was a clean, terrifyingly sophisticated array of electronics, all centered on a single, glowing transmitter unit. He fumbled with the multimeter, his hands shaking, trying to identify the main power feed. Behind him, he could hear Mark's desperate, hushed voice. "Hey kids, let's go home. Come on, this way. Your moms are waiting." But the children didn't respond. They continued their slow, inexorable march toward the fence, their blank eyes fixed on the tower. Lily was at the front. "David! They're not listening. They're almost here," Mark yelled, panic fraying his voice. David saw the main conduit. It was thick and heavily insulated. There was no time to be delicate. He grabbed his insulated cutters, took a deep breath to fight the dizzying hypnosis of the hum, and squeezed. The tool bit through the thick cable with a heavy thunk. A shower of blue-white sparks erupted from the box, and the glowing transmitter inside went dark. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. A profound, crushing silence fell over the hill. It was more than the absence of sound. It was the absence of pressure, of presence. The hum in David's skull vanished. On the path, the children stopped dead in their tracks. For a moment, they stood, swaying slightly, and then, as one, they blinked. Confusion washed over their faces, followed by fear. They looked around, bewildered, as if waking from a long, confusing dream in a dark, strange place. Lily's eyes found David, and she began to cry. "Daddy?" The song had been silenced. The walk back down the hill was a surreal exodus. David and Mark gathered the crying, disoriented children, murmuring reassurances about bad dreams and sleepwalking. They slipped back into the neighborhood like ghosts, delivering each child to their frantic parents with a whispered, partial explanation of a prank or a strange game. No one questioned it too deeply, their relief eclipsing their confusion. The next day, a palpable peace settled over Maple Creek Estates. The air felt lighter. Buster chased the squirrel in the backyard with joyous, reckless abandon. The miller's beagles were blissfully silent. The children remembered nothing specific, only a vague, lingering impression of a loud, bad dream or a buzzing sound that made my head hurt. It was a collective amnesia, a mercy David was profoundly grateful for. A few days later, a truck from a generic utility contractor arrived at the tower. David watched from his window as two men spent an hour at the control box, shrugged, and left. The vandalism was logged, passed between departments, and ultimately buried under a mountain of digital bureaucracy. The tower remained standing, but it was now just a piece of metal on a hill, its voice silenced, its purpose inert. Months passed. Life found its rhythm again, but it was a new rhythm for David. He was closer to his family than ever, his every action infused with the quiet terror of what he had almost lost. He never fully relaxed. He found himself constantly listening, not for a threat, but for its absence. The quiet in his house was a treasure he polished daily. He spent hours with Lily, reading stories, building Legos, soaking in her laughter, a sound more precious than any he had ever engineered. The fear subsided, becoming a scar rather than an open wound. He had won. One cool autumn evening, he was tucking Lily into bed. The house was quiet, the only sound the gentle hum of the refrigerator downstairs. He pulled the covers up to her chin and kissed her forehead. "I love you, sweetie," he whispered. "I love you too, Daddy," she said, her eyes sleepy. She snuggled into her pillow and began to hum. It was a simple, quiet three-note melody, a childish little tune she hummed over and over as she drifted off to sleep. David smiled, his heart full. He turned to leave the room, his hand on the light switch. And then he froze. The blood in his veins turned to ice. His breath hitched in his chest. The simple, three-note melody Lily was humming, he knew it. It wasn't from a cartoon or a song they had taught her. With a jolt of pure, soul-shattering dread, he recognized it. It was the core, repeating musical phrase he had isolated from the very heart of the signal, the hypnotic, rhythmic cadence from the pitch-down broadcast. He had cut the cable. He had silenced the tower. He had stopped the signal. But the recording had already been saved.